The crack of gunfire echoed through the valley as Virginia Nelson clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders, standing on the ridge overlooking her father's ranch with tears streaming down her face. It was 1875 in the Montana Territory, and at 22 years old, she had just been given an ultimatum that would change her life forever. Virginia wiped away her tears with trembling fingers. Her father's words still rang in her ears, sharp as the crack of his hunting rifle. "You have until sundown tomorrow to accept Reginald Foster's proposal, or you can pack your things and leave this house for good." The thought of marrying Reginald made her stomach turn. At 45, the banker was more than twice her age, with cold eyes that lingered too long on her figure and a reputation for cruelty toward his business associates. His first two wives had died under circumstances that raised eyebrows throughout the territory, though nothing had ever been proven. But he was wealthy, and to Samuel Nelson, that was all that mattered. Virginia's mother had passed 5 years ago, and since then her father had grown bitter and harsh, drowning his sorrows in whiskey and gambling. The once prosperous ranch was now deep in debt, and her father saw marrying her off to Foster as the solution to all his problems. As the sun began to set over the distant mountains, painting the sky in vibrant oranges and purples, Virginia made her decision. She would not sacrifice herself to save her father from his own poor choices. She would leave, though where she would go, she had no idea. The next morning, Virginia rose before dawn. She packed a small bag with her most essential belongings, a change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, the little money she had saved from selling eggs and butter in town, and the locket containing a tiny portrait of her mother. She slipped quietly from the house while her father still slept off the previous night's whiskey. The dirt road to town stretched before her, 12 long miles of dusty trail. Virginia squared her shoulders and began walking, her boots already collecting dust as the rising sun warmed her back. She had no plan beyond reaching Silver Creek, the nearest town, where perhaps she could find work as a seamstress or a shop girl. Her mother had taught her to sew and cook, skills that might earn her a modest living. By midday, the Montana sun beat down mercilessly. Virginia's throat was parched, her fair skin beginning to burn despite her bonnet. She paused beneath the shade of a cottonwood tree, taking a small sip from her canteen. She still had several miles to go. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her heart race. Few travelers used this road, and a woman alone was vulnerable. Virginia ducked behind the tree, peering anxiously around its trunk. A lone rider appeared, his broad-shouldered silhouette backlit by the sun. He rode a magnificent black stallion, and even from a distance, she could tell he sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle. As he drew closer, Virginia contemplated remaining hidden, but the road offered no other shelter for miles. If he meant her harm, running would only delay the inevitable. She stepped out from behind the tree, squaring her shoulders and lifting her chin in a show of courage she did not feel. The rider slowed his horse, tipping his hat back to reveal a face tanned by years in the sun. He wasn't much older than her, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes as blue as the Montana sky. A thin scar ran along his jawline, but it did little to detract from his handsome features. "Madam," he greeted her, his voice deep and pleasant. "You're a fair distance from anywhere. Everything all right?" "I'm fine, thank you," Virginia replied stiffly, her hand tightening around the handle of her bag. The stranger's eyes took in her dusty traveling dress, the small bag, and her flushed face. His expression shifted to one of concern. "Forgive me for saying so, but you don't look fine. It's a scorcher today, and Silver Creek is still a good 7 miles from here." Virginia hesitated. Her father had warned her about the dangers of the frontier outlaws, drifters, men with no morals or principles. But this man's eyes held no malice, and her situation was desperate. "I'm on my way to town to seek employment," she said carefully. He nodded, seemingly understanding more than she'd said. "I'm headed that way myself. I'd be honored to offer you a ride, Miss Nelson, Virginia Nelson." "Miss Nelson, I'm Kieran Murphy." He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His palm was calloused but warm, his grip firm but gentle. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Murphy, but I couldn't possibly—" "Please," he interrupted. "It's no trouble. And it wouldn't be right to leave a lady to walk all that way in this heat." Virginia weighed her options. Her feet already ached, and the thought of walking 7 more miles was daunting. The alternative was accepting help from a stranger, a handsome stranger with kind eyes, but a stranger nonetheless. "I promise you'll be safe," Kieran added, seeming to read her thoughts. "I was raised to respect women. My mother would haunt me from beyond the grave if I behaved otherwise." That drew a small smile from Virginia. "In that case, I accept your kind offer, Mr. Murphy." He dismounted in one fluid motion and helped her onto the horse before swinging up behind her. Virginia stiffened slightly at the proximity, but his respectful distance put her at ease. She held her bag in her lap as they set off toward Silver Creek. "May I ask what brings you to seek employment in town?" Kieran asked as they rode. "Most young ladies don't set out alone on foot." Virginia hesitated but decided there was little harm in telling him the truth. "My father has arranged a marriage for me to a man I cannot accept. He gave me an ultimatum: agree to the match or leave his home." "And you chose to leave," Kieran observed. "That takes courage, or foolishness," Virginia replied softly. "Sometimes they're one and the same," he said with a gentle laugh. "Who's the man your father wants you to marry?" "Reginald Foster." Kieran's body tensed behind her. "The banker?" "Yes. Do you know him?" "I know of him," Kieran said, his voice gone cold. "He's not a good man, Miss Nelson." "Your instincts serve you well." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of the horse's hooves and the occasional call of a hawk the only sounds breaking the quiet. The miles passed more comfortably on horseback, and Virginia found herself relaxing despite the unusual circumstances. "Do you have family or friends in Silver Creek?" Kieran eventually asked. "No," Virginia admitted. "I plan to inquire at the shops and hotels about employment. I can sew and cook quite well." Kieran was quiet for a moment. "Accommodations in town can be expensive, especially for a young woman alone." Virginia's heart sank. She hadn't considered that her modest savings might not stretch far enough to secure lodging while she looked for work. "I have a small ranch about 3 miles outside of town," Kieran continued. "It's nothing fancy, but there's a cabin out back that my ranch hand used before he left to get married. It's clean and safe, and you'd be welcome to stay there while you sort things out." Virginia stiffened. "That's very generous, Mr. Murphy, but I couldn't possibly accept." "I understand your hesitation," he said quickly. "I'm not suggesting anything improper. The cabin is separate from the main house. You'd have your privacy and you'd be under no obligation." "Why would you do such a thing for a stranger?" Virginia asked, twisting slightly to see his face. His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "Because someone once did the same for me when I needed it most. And because—" He hesitated, then continued softly, "because when you said your father threatened to throw you out, something in me couldn't bear the thought of you having nowhere to go." There was such honesty in his expression that Virginia found herself believing him. Still, she was cautious. "I would insist on working to earn my keep," she said firmly. Kieran smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way. I could use help with cooking and mending. Bachelor life has its limitations." As they crested a hill, Silver Creek came into view below a bustling frontier town with a main street lined with wooden buildings, a church steeple rising above the rest. "We'll head to town first," Kieran said. "You can ask about work, and I need to pick up some supplies. If you find something suitable, that's fine. If not, my offer stands." Virginia nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you, Mr. Murphy." They rode into town, drawing curious glances from the townspeople. Kieran helped her dismount in front of the general store, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "I'll be at the livery stable when you're finished," he said. "Take your time." Virginia spent the next 2 hours going from business to business, inquiring about positions. The hotel had no openings for maids. The dressmaker already had an assistant. The general store owner's wife handled all their bookkeeping. By the time she reached the saloon, Virginia was growing desperate. "We could use a girl like you," the saloon owner said, his eyes traveling over her figure in a way that made her skin crawl. "Pretty face brings in customers." "I'm looking for respectable employment, sir," Virginia said stiffly. The man laughed. "Ain't nothing disrespectable about serving drinks, honey, but suit yourself. Don't come crawling back when you're hungry." Virginia left, cheeks burning with humiliation. Outside, she leaned against the building, fighting back tears of frustration. This was the reality of her situation. A young woman alone had few options in a frontier town. "Miss Nelson." She looked up to see Kieran approaching, concern evident in his expression. "No luck?" he asked gently. Virginia shook her head, embarrassed by her failure. "It seems there are no positions available for someone of my limited qualifications." Kieran nodded understandingly. "My offer still stands. The cabin is yours for as long as you need it." Virginia hesitated, weighing her dwindling options. Stay in town with her rapidly diminishing funds, possibly ending up having to take the saloon owner's offer, or accept the kindness of this man she barely knew. "I would be grateful to accept your offer, Mr. Murphy," she said finally. "Temporarily, until I can find suitable employment." Relief flooded his features. "Good. I've finished my errands. Are you ready to go?" They rode out of town as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western mountains. Virginia was acutely aware of Kieran's solid presence behind her, of the strength in the arms that occasionally brushed against her sides as he guided the horse. "May I ask what brings you to Montana, Mr. Murphy?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "I came west after the war," he replied. "Served with the Union Army, though I was just a boy when I enlisted. Afterward, I couldn't go back to Pennsylvania. Too many ghosts." He paused. "I worked cattle drives for a few years, saved my money, and bought my place 3 years ago. You live alone?" "Just me and a few hands during busy seasons. Most of the time it's quiet. Some might say too quiet." There was a note of loneliness in his voice that resonated with Virginia. Despite her father's harsh treatment, the isolation of ranch life had sometimes weighed heavily on her. As they turned off the main road onto a narrower trail, a modest but well-maintained ranch came into view. A 2-story wooden house stood at the center, with a barn and corrals nearby. A small cabin sat about 50 yards from the main house, partially shaded by pine trees. "It's lovely," Virginia said sincerely. Kieran's arms tensed slightly around her. "It's not much compared to some of the bigger spreads, but it's mine. Paid for free and clear last year." The pride in his voice made Virginia smile. They rode to the cabin first, where Kieran dismounted and helped her down. "Let me show you inside," he said, retrieving a key from his pocket. The cabin was simple but clean, consisting of one main room with a small iron stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt. A curtained-off area in the corner presumably contained washing facilities. "Like I said, it's nothing fancy," Kieran said, watching her face anxiously. "It's perfect," Virginia assured him, genuinely pleased with the cozy space. After the tension of her father's house, the little cabin felt peaceful. "There's firewood stacked outside, and the pump for water is between here and the main house," Kieran explained. "I'll bring you some supplies from the kitchen. Is there anything specific you need?" Virginia shook her head, overwhelmed by his kindness. "You've done more than enough already, Mr. Murphy." "Kieran, please," he said with a small smile. "If you're going to be living on my property, we might as well use first names." "Virginia, then," she replied, returning his smile. "I'll leave you to get settled. Come to the main house when you're ready, and we can discuss arrangements for meals and such." After he left, Virginia set about organizing her few belongings. She washed her face and hands using the basin provided, combed her hair, and changed into her clean dress. The simple acts of personal care helped restore her sense of dignity after the long, emotional day. As the sun began to set, she made her way to the main house, knocking hesitantly at the door. Kieran answered immediately, as if he'd been waiting nearby. "Come in," he said, stepping back. "I've just put coffee on." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable. The furniture was sturdy and practical, but someone had taken care with the details: curtains at the windows, a colorful rug on the floor, bookshelves filled with volumes that spoke of a man who valued knowledge. "Your home is lovely," Virginia said, genuinely impressed. "Thank you. My sister visited last year and insisted on adding some feminine touches, as she called them." He led her to the kitchen at the back of the house, where a pot of coffee bubbled on the stove. "Are you hungry?" "I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage bacon and eggs." "Please let me," Virginia offered. "It's the least I can do to thank you." Kieran hesitated, then nodded. "The pantry's through there. Help yourself to whatever you find." Virginia set to work, finding comfort in the familiar routine of cooking. She discovered flour, lard, and other basic ingredients and quickly put together a batch of biscuits while Kieran set the table. They ate together at the kitchen table, the conversation flowing more easily than Virginia would have expected. Kieran told her about his small herd of cattle, his plans to expand, the challenges of ranching in the sometimes harsh Montana climate. Virginia found herself sharing stories of her childhood, of her mother's patient teaching, of her dreams of someday having a home of her own. "You're a wonderful cook," Kieran said appreciatively as he finished his second helping. "Much better than what I've been subjecting myself to." Virginia blushed at the compliment. "I enjoy cooking. My mother taught me that food prepared with care nourishes more than just the body." "She sounds like a wise woman," Kieran said softly. "She was." Virginia's voice caught slightly. "I miss her every day." Kieran nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I lost both my parents before I turned 16. That kind of absence never quite goes away." As Virginia washed the dishes, refusing Kieran's offers of help, she found herself reflecting on the strange turn her life had taken in a single day. Yesterday, she had been facing a future as Reginald Foster's unwilling bride. Today, she was in the home of a kind stranger who had offered shelter without expectation. "I've put together some supplies for your cabin," Kieran said as she finished drying the last plate. He indicated a basket on the counter filled with food, candles, matches, and other necessities. "And I found some books you might enjoy. The evenings can get lonely." Virginia was touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you for everything." He walked her back to the cabin in the gathering darkness, carrying the basket of supplies. The night was clear, the sky ablaze with stars. "I'll be up early to tend to chores," Kieran said as they reached her door. "But please sleep as long as you need. You've had a difficult day." Virginia nodded, suddenly shy in the intimate darkness. "Good night, Kieran." "Good night, Virginia." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I'm glad our paths crossed today." After he left, Virginia prepared for bed, her mind replaying the day's events. As she drifted towards sleep, beneath the patchwork quilt, she found herself wondering what tomorrow would bring in this unexpected new chapter of her life. Morning came with the cheerful sound of birdsong. Virginia woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window, momentarily disoriented until memories of the previous day flooded back. She dressed quickly, eager to begin earning her keep. Outside, the ranch was already alive with activity. Kieran was in the corral, working with a young horse. Virginia paused to watch, admiring the confident way he moved, speaking softly to the animal as he gradually introduced it to the saddle. He noticed her and waved, signaling that he'd be a few minutes. Virginia nodded and headed to the main house, where she set about preparing breakfast. By the time Kieran came in, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of coffee, bacon, and fresh biscuits. "You didn't have to do this," he said, though his pleased expression belied his words. "I want to contribute," Virginia replied firmly. "It makes me feel useful." Over breakfast, they established a routine. Virginia would handle the cooking and household tasks while Kieran tended to the ranch work. It was a practical arrangement that suited them both. The days fell into a comfortable pattern. Virginia found satisfaction in bringing order to the bachelor household, discovering that Kieran, for all his capability with ranch work, had neglected many domestic matters. She mended torn shirts, organized the pantry, and added small touches that made the house more homelike. For his part, Kieran seemed genuinely appreciative of her efforts. He brought wildflowers for the table, found a rocking chair in the barn that he cleaned and placed on her cabin's small porch, and always thanked her sincerely for the meals she prepared. Their evenings became a cherished ritual. After supper, they would often sit on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset while Kieran told stories of his cattle driving days or Virginia shared memories of her mother. Sometimes they read together in comfortable silence, Kieran in his chair by the fire, Virginia on the small sofa across from him. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Kieran returned from town with news that made Virginia's blood run cold. "I saw your father in the saloon," he said carefully as they sat down to supper. "He was asking about you." Virginia's hand froze halfway to her water glass. "What did he want? To find you?" "Apparently, Foster is still interested in the match and has offered to forgive your father's debts entirely if the marriage takes place." Kieran's expression darkened. "Your father was offering a reward for information on your whereabouts. Did anyone tell him about me?" Virginia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kieran shook his head. "Not that I heard. Most folks in town don't know you're here, and those who have seen you with me don't know your situation." Virginia nodded, relief washing over her. "Thank you for telling me." "There's more," Kieran said, his jaw tight with anger. "Your father was drunk, saying terrible things that you were ungrateful, that you dishonored him by running away." Hot tears pricked Virginia's eyes. Despite everything, her father's rejection still had the power to wound her. "I'm sorry," Kieran said gently. "I shouldn't have told you that part." "No, I needed to know." Virginia straightened her shoulders. "He's made his choice and I've made mine." Kieran reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You're safe here, Virginia, I promise you that." The warmth of his touch sent a flutter through her chest. They had maintained a careful distance during her stay, their interactions friendly but proper. This was the first time he had touched her since helping her from his horse on that first day, and the contact sent her pulse racing. "Thank you," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing during their quiet evenings and shared meals. Kieran's thumb brushed lightly over her knuckles before he withdrew his hand, the gesture brief but meaningful. That night in her cabin, Virginia found sleep elusive. Her father's presence in town was worrying, but it was thoughts of Kieran that kept her awake, the tenderness in his eyes when he looked at her, the strength of his hand covering hers, the increasing difficulty of maintaining the proper distance between them. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Virginia was hanging laundry behind the main house when she heard the sound of an approaching buggy. Shading her eyes against the sun, she saw a well-dressed woman in her 30s driving a smart rig up the lane. Kieran emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag as he went to greet the visitor. Their conversation was too distant for Virginia to hear, but the woman's animated gestures and Kieran's increasingly uncomfortable posture suggested the exchange was not entirely pleasant. After a few minutes, Kieran reluctantly led the woman toward the house. Virginia straightened her apron, suddenly conscious of her work-worn appearance. "Virginia," Kieran said as they approached, his voice strained. "This is Mrs. Helena Whitfield. She's the widow of my former business partner." Mrs. Whitfield was striking, with carefully styled dark hair and an expensive dress that emphasized her curves. Her assessing gaze took in Virginia's simple dress and the laundry basket at her feet. "How do you do, Mrs. Whitfield?" Virginia said politely. "Miss Nelson," the woman replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Kieran didn't mention he had help. "Virginia is a friend who's staying in the old hand's cabin," Kieran explained, his tone making it clear he didn't appreciate the implication. "How interesting." Mrs. Whitfield turned to Kieran. "I've brought those documents for you to review. Shall we go inside?" Kieran nodded stiffly. "Virginia, would you mind bringing us some coffee?" "Of course," Virginia replied, grateful for the task that would allow her to observe more of this unexpected visitor. In the kitchen, Virginia prepared coffee while straining to hear the conversation in the parlor. Mrs. Whitfield's voice carried, refined but insistent. "The offer is more than generous, Kieran. My late husband would want you to have this opportunity." "I appreciate that, Helena, but as I've told you before, I'm not interested in selling my share of the mine." Virginia nearly dropped the coffee pot. "Mine." Kieran had never mentioned owning a mine. "You're being stubborn," Mrs. Whitfield said, her tone sharpening. "This ranch is charming but hardly profitable. The mine shares would set you up for life." Virginia arranged the coffee and some biscuits left from breakfast on a tray and carried it to the parlor, where she found Mrs. Whitfield standing unnecessarily close to Kieran as they examined papers spread on the desk. "Thank you, Virginia," Kieran said, relieving her of the tray. His eyes conveyed an apology for the awkward situation. "Yes, thank you," Mrs. Whitfield added dismissively before turning back to Kieran. "Now, as I was saying, the Eastern investors are eager to expand operations. Your share would fetch at least $20,000. Virginia nearly gasped. It was a fortune, more money than most ranchers would see in a lifetime. "My decision stands," Kieran said firmly. "I'm not selling." Mrs. Whitfield sighed dramatically. "Very well, but you're making a mistake." She gathered her papers, then added with a meaningful look at Virginia, "I'll be in town for another week if you change your mind." After seeing Mrs. Whitfield to her buggy, Kieran returned to the parlor where Virginia was collecting the coffee cups. "I'm sorry about that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Helena has been trying to buy my mine shares for months." "You never mentioned owning part of a mine," Virginia said, trying to keep her tone neutral. Kieran looked sheepish. "It's not something I talk about much." James Whitfield and I discovered a silver deposit near but 4 years ago. He managed the operation while I used my share of the initial profits to buy this ranch. $20,000 is a lot of money, Virginia observed carefully. It is, Kieran agreed, but money isn't everything. I've seen what mining towns become: the environmental destruction, the boom and bust cycle, the desperation. I'd rather earn an honest living here, even if it's more modest. Virginia studied his face, struck by the integrity behind his words. Most men would have jumped at such wealth. Mrs. Whitfield seemed quite determined. A shadow crossed Kieran's features. Helena has always been ambitious. James was a good man, but she pushed him hard. After he died in a tunnel collapse last year, she took control of his interests and has been consolidating power ever since. She seemed very comfortable with you, Virginia noted, a hint of something that might have been jealousy coloring her tone. Kieran's eyes met hers, his expression earnest. Helena has made her interest clear, but I've never encouraged it. She sees me as a means to an end. The remaining mine shares she doesn't control. Virginia nodded, unreasonably relieved. I should finish the laundry. Virginia, Kieran called as she reached the door. Helena's visit reminds me that people in town might gossip about your living here. I don't want your reputation compromised. I've thought about that, Virginia admitted, but I'm not sure what alternative I have. You could come into town with me tomorrow, Kieran suggested. Perhaps there are new opportunities for employment. The thought of leaving the ranch, leaving Kieran, filled Virginia with a surprising sadness, but she knew he was right to be concerned. That's a good idea. Thank you. The next morning, they rode into Silver Creek together. The town was busier than on Virginia's previous visit, with wagons and riders clogging the main street. There's a cattle buyer in town, Kieran explained. Ranchers from all around come to negotiate prices. Virginia nodded, her attention caught by a commotion outside the saloon. A large man was gesturing angrily, his voice carrying even over the street noise. Worthless girl. Thinks she's too good for an honest match. Virginia's heart sank as she recognized her father's voice. He was clearly drunk. Even at this early hour, his face flushed and his movements unsteady. That's him, she whispered to Kieran. My father. Kieran's jaw tightened. Stay here, he instructed, helping her down from the horse. I'll handle this. Before she could protest, Kieran was striding toward Samuel Nelson, his posture radiating controlled anger. Mr. Nelson, Kieran said loudly enough for Virginia to hear. You're causing a disturbance. Samuel squinted at the younger man. Who the hell are you? Someone who thinks you should go home and sober up, Kieran replied evenly. Mind your own business, boy, Samuel snarled. I'm looking for my ungrateful daughter who ran off rather than do her duty. Sounds to me like she had good reason to leave, Kieran said, his voice hardening. Samuel's bleary eyes narrowed. You know something about my Virginia? Virginia's breath caught as Kieran squared his shoulders. I know that a man who would force his daughter to marry someone she doesn't love doesn't deserve to call himself a father. Several onlookers had gathered, watching the confrontation with interest. Virginia shrank back against a storefront, torn between the desire to intervene and the fear of facing her father. Samuel lunged forward clumsily, grabbing Kieran's shirt. You've seen her. Where is she? With a controlled movement, Kieran broke Samuel's grip and stepped back. I suggest you go home, Mr. Nelson, before you do something you'll regret. Is that a threat? Samuel's hand moved toward his belt where a pistol was holstered. That's enough. The sharp voice of the town sheriff cut through the tension. Sheriff Davis, a graying man with a no-nonsense demeanor, pushed through the crowd. Samuel, you're drunk, again. I'm locking you up until you sober up. But Sheriff, this man knows where Virginia is. Samuel protested as the lawman took his arm. "Even if he does, threatening folks won't help you find her," Sheriff Davis said firmly. "Come on." As the sheriff led her father away, Virginia sagged against the building in relief. Kieran quickly returned to her side. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern etched on his features. Virginia nodded, though her hands were trembling. "Thank you for intervening." Kieran glanced around, noting the curious stares of townspeople. "We should move on. Your father's created quite a scene." They continued down the street, Virginia acutely aware of the whispers that followed them. At the general store, Mrs. Peterson, the proprietor's wife, greeted them with obvious curiosity. "Mr. Murphy, always good to see you," she said warmly, before turning her attention to Virginia. "And who might this be?" "Virginia Nelson, madam," Virginia replied, deciding that concealing her identity was pointless now. Mrs. Peterson's eyebrows rose. "Nelson? Any relation to Samuel Nelson," his daughter, Virginia admitted. "But we're estranged." "I see, Mrs." Peterson's gaze flicked between them, speculation evident in her eyes. "And you're staying?" "Miss Nelson is my guest," Kieran said firmly. "She's staying in the old hand's cabin while seeking employment, Mrs." Peterson nodded, though her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced of the propriety of the arrangement. "Well, as it happens, I might know of a position. Mrs. Whitfield mentioned just yesterday that she's seeking a lady's companion for her stay in town and potentially for travel afterward." Virginia exchanged a quick glance with Kieran, whose expression had darkened at the mention of Helena Whitfield. "That's very kind, but I'm not sure," Virginia began. "It would be a well-paid position," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Mrs. Whitfield is staying at the hotel. You could inquire this afternoon." Virginia thanked her non-committally, and they completed their purchases in silence. Outside, Kieran helped her onto his horse with more force than necessary. "You're not considering Mrs. Whitfield's offer, are you?" he asked as they rode toward the edge of town. Virginia hesitated. "I should at least inquire. It would resolve the issue of propriety." "Helena Whitfield is not a kind employer," Kieran said tightly. "She's gone through 3 companions in the past year." "Perhaps they weren't suitable," Virginia suggested, though she had her doubts. Mrs. Whitfield had seemed cold and calculating during their brief meeting. Kieran was silent for a moment, then sighed. "It's your decision, of course. I worry about you." The admission sent warmth spreading through Virginia's chest. "I appreciate your concern, truly." They rode back to the ranch, the encounter with her father and the prospect of Mrs. Whitfield's employment casting a shadow over what had been a peaceful existence. Virginia found herself torn between practicality and the growing feelings she harbored for Kieran, feelings that made the thought of leaving the ranch increasingly painful. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Virginia finally voiced the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you really offer me shelter that day?" she asked softly. Kieran was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and reflective. "When I was 16, after my parents died, I was alone and desperate. A man named Thomas Blackburn found me sleeping in his barn. Instead of running me off, he offered me work and a place to stay." Kieran's eyes were distant with memory. "He taught me about ranching, about being a man of integrity. When I told you your father had threatened to throw you out, I heard Thomas's voice in my head saying, 'Then open your door to her.'" "What happened to him?" Virginia asked. "He died during the war, pneumonia in a field hospital." Kieran's expression was solemn. "I promised myself I'd honor his memory by showing the same kindness he showed me." "You've done that," Virginia assured him, deeply moved by his story. "More than you know." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, and Virginia felt the air between them change, charged with unspoken emotions. For a breathless moment, she thought Kieran might reach for her hand again or perhaps even kiss her. Instead, he stood abruptly. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rough. "We should turn in." Virginia nodded, hiding her disappointment as she rose to her feet. "Good night, Kieran." "Good night, Virginia." As she walked back to her cabin, Virginia couldn't help wondering if she had imagined the tension between them, or if Kieran was deliberately maintaining his distance out of a sense of honor. Either way, the realization of her growing feelings for him made her decision about Mrs. Whitfield's offer all the more complicated. The next morning, Virginia woke to the sound of angry voices coming from the direction of the main house. She dressed quickly and hurried outside to find Kieran confronting a small group of men on horseback. With a jolt of fear, she recognized her father among them, along with Reginald Foster and two rough-looking men she didn't know. "She's my daughter, and I have every right to take her home," Samuel Nelson was saying, his face flushed with anger or drink or both. "Miss Nelson is of age and makes her own decisions," Kieran replied, his stance deceptively casual, though Virginia could see the tension in his shoulders. "If she wanted to return to your ranch, she would have done so." Foster leaned forward in his saddle, his cold eyes fixed on Kieran. "You've compromised the young lady's reputation by harboring her. The honorable thing would be to return her to her family." Virginia stepped forward, unable to remain hidden any longer. "I'm not going anywhere with you." All heads turned toward her. Her father's expression darkened while Foster's lips curved in a smile that made her skin crawl. "Virginia," her father growled, "get your things. We're leaving." "No, father." Virginia moved to stand beside Kieran, drawing strength from his solid presence. "I'm 22 years old. You gave me a choice: marry Mr. Foster or leave your house. I chose to leave." "You ungrateful—" "Enough, Samuel," Foster interrupted smoothly. "Let me speak with the girl." He dismounted and approached Virginia, stopping when Kieran subtly shifted to place himself partially between them. "Miss Nelson," Foster said, his tone falsely pleasant, "your father is in considerable debt that I've offered to forgive in exchange for your hand. It's a generous arrangement that would secure his future and yours." "I'm aware of the arrangement," Virginia replied coldly, "and I decline." Foster's mask of pleasantness slipped, revealing a flash of anger. "You don't understand the consequences of your refusal. Without my intervention, your father will lose everything." "Is that what you want?" Virginia felt a pang of guilt but steeled herself against it. "My father's financial difficulties are not of my making, nor is it my responsibility to sacrifice my future to resolve them." "You little—" Samuel began, but Foster raised a hand to silence him. "Perhaps you've been influenced by your host," Foster suggested, his gaze shifting to Kieran with undisguised contempt. "A man of limited means who has obviously developed an interest in you." Kieran's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing Virginia to speak for herself. "Mr. Murphy has shown me nothing but kindness and respect," Virginia said firmly, "which is more than I can say for either of you." The two rough-looking men exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. One of them leaned toward Samuel. "This ain't going how you said it would, Nelson. We didn't sign on for forcing no woman." Samuel shot him a venomous look. "Shut your mouth, Jenkins. You're being paid to back me up, not question me." "I ain't being paid to kidnap nobody," the man retorted, turning his horse. "Come on, Pete. This ain't our fight." As the two hired men rode off, the balance of power shifted palpably. Foster's confident demeanor faltered, while Samuel's face contorted with rage. "This isn't over," he spat, pointing a shaking finger at Virginia. "You're no daughter of mine. You can rot here with your cowboy protector." "I think it's time for you gentlemen to leave," Kieran said quietly, his hand resting casually near the pistol holstered at his hip. Foster studied him for a moment, then nodded to Samuel. "Come, Nelson, we'll resolve this another way." As they mounted their horses and rode away, Virginia's legs nearly gave way beneath her. Kieran's arm came around her waist, supporting her. "You were very brave," he murmured. Virginia leaned against him, drawing comfort from his strength. "They'll be back, won't they?" "Possibly," Kieran admitted. "But not today, and we'll be prepared." Inside the house, Kieran poured Virginia a small measure of whiskey, insisting it would help calm her nerves. She sipped it gingerly, grimacing at the burning sensation. What did Foster mean about resolving this another way? She asked. Kieran frowned, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I'm not sure. Foster isn't the type to give up easily when he wants something." "It's my father I'm more worried about," Virginia confessed. "He looked desperate, and he's always had a terrible temper, especially when drinking." Kieran nodded grimly. "I'll speak with Sheriff Davis tomorrow, let him know about the situation. In the meantime, I think we should be cautious." Virginia's hand trembled slightly as she set down her glass. "Perhaps I should consider Mrs. Whitfield's offer after all. If I were in town, employed by someone of her standing, my father might finally accept that I've made my choice." Kieran's expression darkened. "That would put you directly in Helena's path, which has its own complications." "What do you mean?" Kieran hesitated. "Helena isn't just interested in my mine shares. She's made it clear she has personal interests as well." "Oh," Virginia said softly, a flicker of jealousy surprising her. "And do you return those interests?" "No," Kieran said emphatically. "Helena represents everything I left behind when I came West Artifice, ambition at any cost, using people as stepping stones." Virginia nodded, relief washing through her. "Still, the position would provide a proper solution to my situation. Is that what you want?" Kieran asked, his eyes searching hers. To leave, the vulnerability in his question made Virginia's heart race. "No," she admitted quietly, "that's not what I want at all." Kieran moved closer, his expression intense. "What do you want, Virginia?" The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. Virginia's breath caught as Kieran reached out, his fingers lightly tracing her cheek. "I want to stay," she whispered. "With you?" Kieran's eyes darkened. "You should know that my intentions are honorable." "I'm not offering you shelter as a temporary arrangement. He broke off, visibly struggling to find the right words. "I care for you, Virginia, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Virginia's heart soared at his confession. "I care for you too, Kieran." He took her hands in his touch gentle but firm. "Then stay, not as my guest or my housekeeper, but with the understanding that I intend to court you properly if you'll permit it." "I would like that very much," Virginia said, her voice trembling with emotion. Kieran's smile was radiant as he raised her hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Then that's settled. But I think we should still speak with Sheriff Davis. Your father's behavior concerns me." Virginia nodded, though in that moment, with Kieran's hands holding hers and his eyes filled with affection. Her father's threats seemed distant and powerless. The next day, they rode into town together to speak with Sheriff Davis. The lawman listened gravely to their account of Samuel Nelson's visit to the ranch. "I'll keep an eye on him," the sheriff promised. "But there's not much I can do unless he breaks the law. Being an angry father isn't illegal." "We understand," Kieran said. "We just wanted you to be aware of the situation." As they left the sheriff's office, Virginia spotted Helena Whitfield emerging from the hotel across the street. The elegant woman saw them and immediately changed direction, approaching with a determined stride. "Kieran, how fortunate to see you," Helena said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Her gaze slid to Virginia. "And Miss Nelson, I understand you might be interested in the position as my companion." Virginia hesitated, glancing at Kieran. Their conversation the previous evening had changed everything, but she wasn't sure how much they wanted to reveal publicly. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Whitfield," Virginia began carefully, "but my circumstances have changed." Helena's perfectly shaped eyebrows arched. "Oh, in what way?" Kieran stepped slightly closer to Virginia, his presence reassuring. "Miss Nelson has agreed to allow me to court her," he said simply. Helena's expression froze for a moment before she composed herself. "I see. How quaint." She turned to Virginia, her voice sharpening. "I hope you realize what you're giving up, my dear. Kieran's ranch is charming, but hardly the life a young woman dreams of. Whereas travel, fine clothes, sophisticated company—" "I appreciate your concern," Virginia said with more confidence than she felt, "but I've made my decision." Helena's gaze hardened. "Very well. But Kieran, my offer for your mine shares remains open. Think carefully before you refuse again. Money opens doors that would otherwise remain closed to someone of your background." With that parting shot, she turned and walked away, her skirts swishing angrily around her ankles. "I'm sorry," Kieran said quietly. "Helena can be vindictive when she doesn't get her way." Virginia squeezed his arm reassuringly. "It doesn't matter. I meant what I said." They completed their errands in town, conscious of the curious glances and whispers that followed them. Word of Kieran's intention to court Virginia had clearly spread quickly, and opinions seemed divided between approval and scandal. "People will talk," Virginia said as they rode home, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. "Especially given how we met and my living arrangement on your property." "Let them talk," Kieran replied, his voice steady. "We know the truth of things." Virginia smiled, touched by his unconcern for gossip. It was one of the things she'd grown to admire about him, his focus on what mattered rather than appearances. Back at the ranch, Kieran helped her down from the horse, his hands lingering at her waist. "Would you like to go for a ride tomorrow? There's a place up in the foothills I'd like to show you." "I'd love that," Virginia replied, her heart warming at the thought of spending time alone with him away from the ranch and its responsibilities. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect for riding. Kieran had taught Virginia to ride one of his gentler horses over the past weeks, and she had proven an apt pupil. They set out after breakfast, riding side by side along a trail that wound gradually upward into the pine-covered foothills. "How did you find your way to Montana?" Virginia asked as they rode. "Of all the places you could have settled after the war, why here?" Kieran smiled, his eyes scanning the horizon. "I followed the cattle drives north from Texas. The first time I saw this country, the mountains, the vast open spaces, something in me recognized it as home." "It is beautiful," Virginia agreed, taking in the sweeping vistas of grass and forest, the distant peaks still capped with snow even in early summer. They rode for over an hour, climbing steadily until Kieran led them off the trail to a rocky outcrop overlooking a pristine mountain lake. The water was a deep blue, reflecting the surrounding pines and the soaring cliff face on the far shore. "This is magnificent," Virginia breathed as they dismounted. "I come here to think," Kieran said, spreading a blanket on a flat section of rock. "It helps put things in perspective." They sat side by side, sharing the lunch Virginia had packed: cold chicken, biscuits, and apple tarts. The conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by comfortable silences as they enjoyed the spectacular view. "Tell me about your dreams," Kieran said eventually. "What did you hope for before your father's ultimatum changed everything?" Virginia considered the question. "I wanted a home of my own, I suppose, children someday, but mostly I wanted the freedom to make my own choices." She glanced at him shyly. "What about you? What do you dream of?" "Expanding the ranch," Kieran replied without hesitation. "Building something lasting that could be passed down to future generations." His eyes met hers, warm with feeling, and finding someone to share it with. Virginia's heart quickened at the implication in his words. "That sounds like a wonderful dream." Kieran reached over, his hand covering hers. "It seems more possible now than it ever has before." The air between them hummed with possibility. Kieran leaned closer, his eyes asking a silent question. When Virginia nodded almost imperceptibly, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a gentle kiss. It was Virginia's first kiss, and the tenderness of it brought tears to her eyes. Kieran drew back slightly, his thumb brushing her cheek. "I've wanted to do that since the day I found you by that cottonwood tree," he confessed. Virginia smiled, her heart overflowing with happiness. "I'm glad you waited until now." They stayed at the lake for hours, talking, sharing occasional sweet kisses, and simply enjoying each other's presence. By the time they began the ride home, the sun was low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the trail. "I should have brought lanterns," Kieran said with a rueful smile. "I lost track of time." "I did too," Virginia admitted. "It was worth it, though." They had just reached the outer boundary of Kieran's property when the crack of a rifle shot shattered the peace of the evening. Kieran's horse reared in alarm as dirt kicked up just inches from its hooves. "Get down!" Kieran shouted, dismounting in one fluid motion and pulling Virginia from her saddle. He positioned himself between her and the direction of the shot, drawing his pistol. Virginia's heart hammered in her chest as they crouched behind a large boulder. "Who would be shooting at us?" "I don't know," Kieran said grimly, "but I intend to find out." Another shot rang out, striking the rock above their heads and sending fragments of stone flying. The shooter was getting closer. "When I count to 3, run for those trees," Kieran instructed, indicating a stand of pines about 20 yards away. "I'll cover you." Virginia nodded, gathering her skirts in preparation. At Kieran's count, she sprinted for the trees, hearing him fire 2 shots in the direction of their attacker. She reached the shelter of the pines, her breath coming in gasps, and turned to see Kieran running toward her. A third shot echoed across the land, and Kieran stumbled, clutching his left arm. Virginia bit back a scream as he regained his balance and made it to her side. "You're hurt," she whispered, seeing blood seeping through his fingers. "It's just a graze," Kieran assured her, though his face had paled. "We need to keep moving." They worked their way through the trees, staying low and moving as quietly as possible. When they reached the edge of the wooded area, the ranch house was visible about a quarter-mile away across open ground. "We'll have to make a run for it," Kieran said, checking his pistol. "Stay close to me." They emerged from the trees at a sprint, Virginia's lungs burning as she struggled to keep pace with Kieran despite her restrictive skirts. No shots followed them, and they reached the house safely, bursting through the door and slamming it behind them. Kieran immediately moved to secure the windows while Virginia fetched water and bandages for his injured arm. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, leaving a bloody furrow that made Virginia wince as she cleaned it. Who would do this? She asked as she wrapped a clean bandage around his arm. Kieran's expression was grim. "My first thought is your father, but it could be Foster. Or even one of Helena's men. She's not above using intimidation to get what she wants." Virginia tied off the bandage, her hands trembling slightly. "What do we do now?" "We stay alert," Kieran replied, checking his pistol again. "And first thing tomorrow, I ride to town to inform Sheriff Davis." "I'm coming with you," Virginia said firmly. "I'm not staying here alone." Kieran nodded, understanding the fear behind her insistence. "We'll go together." But tonight, we both stay in the main house. I'll sleep downstairs by the door." They spent an uneasy night, taking turns to watch while the other tried to rest. Every noise outside the wind in the trees, an owl's call, the distant howl of a wolf made Virginia tense with apprehension. Morning came without further incident, and they prepared to ride to town as soon as it was light enough to see clearly. As Kieran saddled the horses, Virginia packed a small bag with essentials, uncertain when they would return. They were halfway to town when they met Sheriff Davis and a deputy riding hard in the direction of the ranch. "Murphy," Davis called as they approached. "I was just coming to find you." "Someone took shots at us yesterday evening," Kieran said without preamble. "That's why we're headed to town." The sheriff's expression darkened. "I suspected as much. Samuel Nelson was found dead this morning behind the saloon, shot in the chest." Virginia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Despite their estrangement and his recent behavior, the news of her father's death hit her hard. "When?" Kieran asked, his arm instinctively going around Virginia's shoulders. "Sometime last night, according to Doc Stevens," the sheriff replied. "And there's more. Reginald Foster is claiming you did it, Murphy. Says you threatened Nelson yesterday and vowed to take care of the problem." "That's ridiculous," Virginia exclaimed. "Kieran was with me the entire night." Sheriff Davis nodded. "I figured as much, but Foster's stirring up trouble in town. He's already got a group of men ready to form a vigilance committee. I need you both to come back with me so we can sort this out." The ride to town was tense, Virginia's mind reeling from the news of her father's death and the accusation against Kieran. She felt numb, unable to process the conflicting emotions of grief for a father who had rejected her and fear for the man she was coming to love. Silver Creek was in an uproar when they arrived. A crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, and angry voices could be heard demanding action. Reginald Foster stood on the steps, his face flushed with apparent righteous indignation. "There he is," Foster shouted as they approached. "The murderer himself." The crowd turned, murmurs rising as they spotted Kieran. Several men moved forward threateningly until Sheriff Davis raised his hand. "That's enough," the lawman called. "Murphy's here to answer questions, and he'll get a fair hearing. Anyone who tries to take justice into their own hands will find themselves in a cell." The crowd reluctantly parted, allowing them to dismount and enter the sheriff's office. Inside, the body of Samuel Nelson lay on a table covered with a sheet. Virginia approached slowly, her legs unsteady. "You want to see him?" Sheriff Davis asked gently. Virginia nodded, steeling herself as the sheriff drew back the sheet. Her father's face was peaceful in death, the lines of bitterness and anger smoothed away. He looked older than she remembered and somehow smaller. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears filling her eyes despite everything. Whatever his failings, he was still her father, and now he was gone forever. Kieran stood quietly beside her, his solid presence a comfort in the storm of her emotions. After a moment, she nodded to the sheriff, who replaced the sheet. "Now," Davis said, turning to Kieran, "tell me where you both were last night." Kieran recounted their day at the lake and the shooting incident on their return. "After that, we stayed in the house all night, taking turns keeping watch. Neither of us left the property." "Can anyone else verify that?" the sheriff asked. "No," Kieran admitted. "We were alone." Foster, who had been allowed to enter with them, scoffed. "Convenient. The girl would say anything to protect him. We all know she's been living in sin out at his ranch." "That's not true," Virginia said fiercely. "Kieran has been nothing but honorable." Sheriff Davis raised a hand to silence Foster. "Miss Nelson, I need to ask you directly. Did Kieran Murphy leave the ranch at any time last night?" "No, Sheriff," Virginia stated firmly. "He was with me the entire time." We were both frightened after being shot at and stayed close to each other for safety." Davis nodded thoughtfully. "Foster, you claim Murphy threatened Nelson yesterday. Were there witnesses to this threat?" Foster hesitated. "Not specifically to those words, but everyone knows there was bad blood between them over the girl." "That's not evidence," the sheriff pointed out. "And from what I've seen, it's Nelson and you who were causing trouble, not Murphy." The door opened, and a young boy of about 12 rushed in. "Sheriff, they found something by Nelson's body that they missed before." "What is it, Billy?" Davis asked. "A silver money clip with initials on it," the boy panted. "Doc Stevens has it." The sheriff dispatched his deputy to fetch the doctor, and they waited in tense silence until he arrived, a small evidence bag in hand. "Found this under the body when we moved it," Dr. Stevens explained, handing over a silver money clip engraved with the initials HW. Virginia and Kieran exchanged a startled glance. "Helena Whitfield," Kieran said quietly. Foster's face reddened. "That proves nothing. Anyone could have dropped that." "Perhaps," Sheriff Davis agreed, "but it's enough to widen our investigation." He turned to Kieran. "I'm not arresting you, Murphy, but I'd appreciate it if you and Miss Nelson stayed in town until we get to the bottom of this." "We understand," Kieran agreed. "We'll take rooms at the hotel." Outside, the crowd had dispersed somewhat, though curious onlookers still lingered. As they made their way toward the hotel, Virginia clung to Kieran's arm, overwhelmed by the day's events. "I can't believe he's gone," she said softly. "Despite everything, I never wished him harm." "Of course you didn't," Kieran assured her. "Your father made his choices, Virginia. His death is not your responsibility." At the hotel, they were met with cool reception from the clerk, who clearly had heard the accusations against Kieran. Nevertheless, they secured 2 rooms adjacent but properly separate and went upstairs to rest after the emotional morning. Virginia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floral wallpaper without really seeing it. A soft knock at her door roused her from her thoughts. "It's me," Kieran's voice called. She opened the door to find him looking tired but determined. "I've been thinking," he said. "Helena's money clip at the scene can't be a coincidence." "You think she killed my father?" Virginia asked, trying to make sense of the idea. "I don't know," Kieran admitted, "but I know she's capable of extreme measures to get what she wants, and right now she wants my mind shares and me." Virginia gestured for him to enter, leaving the door appropriately ajar for propriety's sake. "But why kill my father? How does that help her get what she wants?" Kieran paced the small room. "What if she wanted to frame me? If I were arrested or hanged for murder, my property, including the mine shares, would likely be sold at auction. She'd be the highest bidder, no doubt." The theory was chilling but made a terrible kind of sense. "We need to speak with the sheriff again," Virginia said. Before they could act on that decision, another knock came at the door. Virginia opened it to find Mrs. Peterson from the general store. "Miss Nelson, Mr. Murphy," she said, her usually cheerful face serious. "I have information you need to hear. May I come in?" They welcomed her, and Mrs. Peterson wasted no time getting to the point. "I was closing up late last night when I saw Mrs. Whitfield speaking with your father, Miss Nelson. They seemed to be arguing, and then they walked toward the alley behind the saloon together. I thought it odd but didn't think much more about it until I heard about the murder this morning." Virginia and Kieran exchanged glances. "What time was this, Mrs. Peterson?" Kieran asked. "Just after 10 o'clock, she replied. The saloon was still busy, but most other businesses had closed." "Have you told Sheriff Davis?" Virginia asked. Mrs. Peterson nodded. "Just now. He's gone to speak with Mrs. Whitfield at her hotel. I wanted to tell you myself to apologize for my suspicions about your arrangement. It's clear to me now that Mr. Murphy is a gentleman of honor." "Thank you," Virginia said sincerely. "Your testimony could make all the difference." After Mrs. Peterson left, Kieran took Virginia's hand. "We should go to the sheriff's office. I want to know what Helena has to say for herself." They arrived at the sheriff's office to find a scene of confusion. Deputy Wilson was trying to calm several agitated townspeople, while Sheriff Davis was nowhere to be seen. "What's happening?" Kieran asked the deputy. "Sheriff went to question Mrs. Whitfield and found her room empty," Wilson explained. "Her luggage is gone, and the hotel clerk says she paid her bill in full about an hour ago, saying she had urgent business in Butte." "She's running," Virginia realized. Kieran's expression hardened. "Not if I can help it." He turned to the deputy. "How long ago did she leave?" "Can't be more than 30 minutes, Wilson replied. "Sheriff took a couple of men and rode out after her, but she had a good head start in that fancy rig of hers." "We can catch up," Kieran said to Virginia. "The road to Butte passes near my property. I know shortcuts she won't." Virginia nodded, determination replacing the shock and grief that had consumed her earlier. "Let's go." They rode hard, taking a trail through the foothills that shaved miles off the journey. As they crested a rise, they spotted a cloud of dust on the road below Helena's carriage, moving at a dangerous pace toward the territorial border. "There," Kieran pointed. "And look, the sheriff's posse is gaining on her." They urged their horses down the slope to intercept the carriage. Helena must have spotted them, as the vehicle suddenly veered off the road onto a trail that led toward the river. "She's trying to cross at the ford," Kieran shouted. "But the water's high from the spring melt. It's too dangerous." They raced toward the river, arriving just as Helena's carriage plunged into the swollen waters. The horses struggled against the current, the carriage tilting precariously. Without hesitation, Kieran spurred his horse into the water. Virginia watched in horror as he fought his way to the panicking team, grabbing the lead horse's bridle and trying to guide the animals toward the far bank. Sheriff Davis and his men arrived, and two of them rode into the river to help. Together, they managed to bring the carriage to the shallower water near the bank, where it could be steadied. Helena emerged, her elegant clothes soaked and mudded, her carefully styled hair hanging in wet strands around her face. The sheriff immediately took her into custody, reciting the charges against her: the murder of Samuel Nelson and the attempted framing of Kieran Murphy. "You have no proof," Helena spat, her composure finally cracking. "We have your money clip found at the scene, Mrs. Peterson's testimony that she saw you with Nelson shortly before his death, and your flight when questioned," Sheriff Davis countered. "That's enough for now." As the sheriff led Helena away, Kieran waded out of the river to Virginia's side, dripping wet but unharmed. "Are you all right?" she asked, helping him from his horse. "Just cold," he assured her with a small smile. "But it was worth it to see justice served." They followed the sheriff's party back to town, where news of Helena's arrest spread quickly. By evening, the mood had shifted dramatically. Kieran was no longer viewed with suspicion, and several people even approached to apologize for their hasty judgments. In the days that followed, the full story emerged. Helena had indeed killed Samuel Nelson after he threatened to reveal her plot to frame Kieran. She had been using Foster as an unwitting ally, playing on his desire for Virginia and his resentment of Kieran. Foster himself was cleared of direct involvement in the murder, but left town in disgrace when his manipulation of Samuel Nelson came to light. A week after her father's death, Virginia stood beside his grave as the preacher said the final prayers. The funeral was sparsely attended. A few neighbors who had known him in better days, the sheriff out of respect for his office, and Kieran, who stood supportively at Virginia's side throughout the service. "I keep thinking about how it ended between us," Virginia said quietly as they walked away from the cemetery. His last words to me were that I was no daughter of his. Kieran took her hand gently. Grief takes many forms, Virginia. You're mourning not just your father's death, but the relationship you never had with him. That's natural and right. Virginia nodded, drawing comfort from his understanding. What happens now? With the ranch, I mean. I suppose it will be sold to pay his debts. Actually, Kieran said hesitantly, I've been meaning to discuss that with you. Your father's ranch borders my property to the east. I've been thinking of expanding in that direction for some time. Virginia looked up at him in surprise. You want to buy my father's ranch? If you're amenable, Kieran replied. The lawyer says as his only heir, you'll inherit the property once the debts are settled. There should still be a modest sum left over for you. The realization that she now owned her childhood home, however temporarily, was startling. I hadn't thought about inheritance, Virginia admitted. It feels strange to benefit from his death when we were so estranged. You don't have to decide anything now, Kieran assured her. Take all the time you need. They walked in silence for a while, the spring sunshine warm on their shoulders. Virginia found her thoughts turning not to the past, but to the future, a future that increasingly included Kieran. I've been thinking, she said carefully, about what happens after all this is settled, about us. Kieran stopped walking, turning to face her. What are you thinking? Virginia met his gaze directly. I'm thinking that life is unpredictable and sometimes painfully short. I'm thinking that I don't want to waste time when I already know what I want. And what do you want? Kieran asked, his voice low and intense. You, Virginia replied simply. A life with you. Kieran's face broke into a smile that took her breath away. He took both her hands in his. Virginia Nelson, are you proposing to me? Virginia laughed, the sound surprising after the somber day. I suppose I am, in a way. Is that terribly forward of me? Terribly, Kieran agreed, his eyes dancing with happiness. But as it happens, I've been carrying this for days, waiting for the right moment. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold ring set with a modest but beautiful diamond. It was my mother's, he explained softly. I've been saving it for the woman I would spend my life with. Virginia's eyes filled with tears as Kieran knelt before her, right there on the dusty street. Virginia Nelson, will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? He asked, his voice steady but full of emotion. Yes, Virginia whispered, her heart overflowing with joy. Yes, with all my heart. Kieran slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and drew her into his arms, kissing her tenderly as several townspeople stopped to watch and smile at the romantic scene. I love you, Virginia, Kieran murmured against her lips. I think I've loved you since I found you under that cottonwood tree. And I love you, Virginia replied, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in just a few short weeks. From the moment you said you'd open your door to me. The wedding took place 2 months later on a perfect summer day. They chose to hold the ceremony on Kieran's ranch, their ranch now, as Virginia had agreed to sell her father's property to Kieran, using the proceeds to add a new wing to the main house. The entire town turned out for the celebration, eager to witness the happy ending to a story that had begun in such dramatic circumstances. Even Mrs. Peterson had embraced their romance wholeheartedly, organizing a quilting circle to create a wedding gift for the couple. As Virginia stood beside Kieran before the preacher, dressed in a simple but elegant white gown, she felt a profound sense of rightness. The journey that had begun with her father's harsh ultimatum had led her to a love deeper and more true than she had ever imagined possible. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the preacher declared. You may kiss your bride. Kieran's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, and the assembled guests broke into applause and cheers. The celebration continued into the evening with dancing and feasting under lantern light. As the night grew late, Virginia and Kieran slipped away from the festivities to the privacy of their home, where they would begin their life together. "Happy?" Kieran asked as he carried her over the threshold of the newly expanded ranch house. "Completely," Virginia replied, her heart full to bursting. "It's strange to think that if my father hadn't threatened to throw me out, we might never have met." Kieran set her gently on her feet, his arms remaining around her waist. "Sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones," he observed. "I'm grateful every day that I was riding that road when you needed someone. And I'm grateful you were the kind of man who would stop to help a stranger," Virginia replied, reaching up to touch his face tenderly. As moonlight spilled through the window, casting a silvery glow over their new life together, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, the girl who had been cast out and the cowboy who had opened his door to her. 5 years later, Virginia sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching Kieran teaching their 3-year-old son, Samuel Thomas Murphy, to ride a gentle pony. Their infant daughter, Elizabeth, slept peacefully in a cradle beside her chair. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Kieran's cattle operation had expanded, and Virginia had started a small business selling preserves and baked goods in town, her products becoming known throughout the territory for their quality. They had named their son after both Virginia's father and the man who had once opened his door to a young, orphaned Kieran, a way of honoring the past while embracing the future they were building together. As Virginia watched her husband's patient instruction and their son's delighted giggles, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The pain of her father's rejection had faded, replaced by the joy of the family she and Kieran had created together. Kieran looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile still made her heart skip a beat, even after years of marriage. He lifted their son from the pony and carried him toward the house, the little boy chattering excitedly about his riding adventure. "Mama, did you see? I rode all by myself," Samuel exclaimed as they reached the porch. "I saw, darling," Virginia assured him, smoothing his dark hair so like his father's back from his forehead. "You were very brave." Kieran set the boy down and leaned over to kiss Virginia softly. "Just like his mother," he murmured against her lips. As the sun began to set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Virginia gave thanks for the twist of fate that had led her to this life. From the ultimatum that had seemed like the end of her world had come the greatest blessing she could have imagined, a love that had opened not just a door, but an entire future filled with joy, purpose, and belonging. In the wild, often harsh territory of Montana, they had built something beautiful and enduring, a home, a family, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And it had all begun with a father's threat, a dusty road, and a cowboy's simple offer of shelter that had become so much more. "I love you," Virginia said as Kieran sat beside her, their son climbing into his lap while their daughter slept peacefully nearby. "And I love you," Kieran replied, the words as heartfelt now as the first time he had spoken them. "Always." As darkness fell, and the stars appeared one by one in the vast Montana sky, the Murphy family sat together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built from the most unlikely of beginnings, proof that even in the untamed wilderness of the American frontier, love could transform the harshest ultimatum into the sweetest of promises.